If you've ever described or identified yourself as an artistically creative person, then the final episode of Comic Girls might just be the most harrowingly relatable episode of anime you'll see this year. I still haven't stopped thinking about how accurately it manages to capture the soul-crushing anxiety, self-doubt, and identity crisis inherent to my creative process and that of many artistic people I know. Of course, this episode was hardly out of step for the series. Despite being largely undersold in critical circles, over the course of the show it proved to possess an emotional maturity and capacity for empathy, on par with and exceeding many of the shows it aired alongside. Along with just generally being one of the best looking shows of the year, as far as I was concerned, it had nothing left to prove. However, apparently Kaori Hanzawa and the show's production staff felt otherwise. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's back up a bit. Thematically, Comic Girls largely seeks to explore the challenges inherent to growing as an artist, and the value of positive social environments in assisting that growth. The ideal environment original manga author Kaori Hanzawa envisions where artists can most efficiently thrive and improve goes directly against the stereotype of the artist as a lonely, isolated individual whose ideas are a product of their own imagination and theirs alone. Instead, by infusing her own experience into the characters' personalities and placing them within a setting where they're able to bounce ideas off of each other and get advice from their peers, she espouses her vision of the creative process as one that necessitates social interaction. Something that closely identifies to my own needs as an artist. Despite generally being an introverted person, the moments in which I'm left to my own devices for extended periods of time often find me at my least productive, and the idea of such an environment is immediately appealing to me. However, after thoroughly making its case for the benefits of these kinds of creative environments, the series turns its attention to the process of the individual. The finale explores a specific kind of creative struggle, one that its lead character Kaos embodies for much of the series, but could only be fully extracted and explored in isolation from the rest of the cast, that being the ongoing process of developing artistic identity. At the start of the episode, just as the 4 other girls prepare to return home ahead of her, Kaos faces a seemingly immovable creative block while being under the pressure of a rapidly approaching deadline. While her friends do everything in their power to encourage her, the moment she's left alone, Kaos quickly falls apart and finds herself on the brink of a nervous breakdown. While she finds some validation in being under the pressure of a deadline, since it confirms that her aspirations to become a professional manga author aren't out of reach, she's also well aware that the opportunity presently before her is entirely transient and could pass her by at a moment's notice, knowing that regardless of her ongoing anxiety attack and crippling emotional isolation, she continues struggling to channel her creativity and finish the project on time. While Kaos is familiar with the breakneck workflow of professional manga artists, having witnessed and participated in it throughout the series, the pressure doesn't serve to cultivate her creativity as much as it does her stress. Any artistic person will tell you that creativity isn't some kind of faucet that can be turned on or off at a moment's notice, and that sometimes even the pressure of an industry-set deadline isn't enough to force it into submission, at least not in a way the creator can be satisfied with, which in turn affects the mental health of the artist, which in turn makes that motivation even more difficult to access. The struggle inherent to pursuing a professional creative career while attaching that passion to your identity is one that I and many artists I know are intimately familiar with. If you are an actively artistic person working within a capitalist society, then you've probably felt the pressure to monetize your creative passions and pastimes in response to the stress of a failing economy. And the ever-present knowledge that your art is only as valuable to that economy as it is marketable sometimes manifests itself in the form of these kinds of anxiety attacks and identity conflicts. Having been on YouTube for a while now and made friends who are actively transforming their passion on this platform into a full-time job, I've come to know the constant grind necessitated by the algorithm for that goal to even be plausible as a daily uphill battle with no regard for the creator's mental and physical state. And generally, the same goes for almost any professional creative industry. For the first time, Kaos is exercising her passion under these conditions and feeling their effects in full force. As she finds herself mentally and emotionally incapable of being productive, pressured by an unforgiving deadline and lacking friends to advise and encourage her, she begins questioning whether or not she's even capable of succeeding as a professional creator, and if in her current state it would even be honest to refer to herself as such, and maintain that concept as a part of her identity. Once you recognize what your passions are and begin using them as a means of self-identifying as an artist, writer, musician, etc., there's a subtle, implicit need to define for your own sake exactly how that identity impacts and motivates your life. What does it even mean to be an artist? When your mind is blank and your creative resources run dry, how does that reflect on you? If it's an ongoing struggle that lasts days or even weeks, leaving you with nothing to show for your time and effort, can you even be said to really be an artist? If the answer to that question is no, what do you have left? This is where Kaus finds herself in the second half of the episode, and about when the imposter syndrome starts to set in. She deflects the praise and recognition she receives by comparing her minimal successes to those of her peers, believing herself to have done nothing deserving of it. In her present state, she's incapable of viewing herself as a legitimate manga author. So as an artist, once you reach this point, is it simply a matter of giving up and finding a new line of work? A new hobby, disregarding all the time you've already dedicated to it? When you find yourself surrounded by and in admiration of creators who excel at their craft and don't appear to struggle in the same ways as you, what does that say about your potential not only as a professional, but as a creator, period? I say this from personal experience here. I've been calling myself a writer and musician ever since middle school. I've given up on writing and music so many times over the years, only to inevitably come crawling back to them over and over for reasons I can't begin to fathom. While making this very series of videos, there have been days when I've sat down to write only to find that the words just won't come. There's a scene when she's wrapped in a blanket with her drawing tablet in her hands, breaking down in tears, while apologizing to her editor for not being able to move faster despite genuinely wanting to finish the story. And I feel that. There's a scene where her mom visits her and she's unable to accept praise in the light of her continued failures in comparison to her peers. And I feel that too. There's a scene where she recesses into her mind and is momentarily able to see herself as a real manga author, only to be completely overwhelmed by self-doubt just a few minutes later. You get the point. I don't know how better to say it. Comic Girls just gets it. So, having placed Kaus in the ideal situation for her struggles with anxiety and creative identity to be explored, where does the series leave us? Well, as the deadline rapidly approaches, she's reminded by her mother and friends that her work has inherent value, is enjoyed by others, and that those things in of themselves are more than adequate to validate her as a legitimate artist, giving her just the push she needed to find her motivation and finish the story. Later on, when she receives a call from her editor, she's met with praise for having come so far in her artwork, storytelling, and characterization since the beginning of the show. After boarding the train home, she breaks down in tears once again, reflecting on how the relationship she built with the other girls influenced that growth. Comic Girls is sympathetic to the struggles of young artists still trying to gain their creative footing, but ultimately exhibits an overwhelming faith in their ability to push through those challenges and create genuine, intimate pieces of art reflective of their passions, and in the process of doing so, discover new things about themselves, establish deeper connections with those around them, and grow as creators and people. Kaus reminds me a lot of myself in ways that aren't always positive, but she also reminds me of why I continue striving to be creative and why that's not going to stop anytime soon. As Kaori Hanzawa stated in a recent interview, I think it's common to find people who keep trying their best despite how lonely they feel in this job. In times like that, I'd like them to keep their enthusiasm alive and keep pushing forward. Just like how we see Kaus and her friends at the dorm power on and keep encouraging each other in spite of their hardships. I hope that even if they can't find fellow mangaka around them, watching Comic Girls will remind them that they're not alone in their struggles, and give them the strength to carry on.